Okay, so today we'll be discussing about Helicobacter pylori. Beginning with the topic, Helicobacter pylori is basically a gram-negative bacilli which is curved and it is flagellated, which makes it motile. It basically has unifold flagellae which are 4 to 8 in number. Now, talking about how does it colonize the gastric mucosa is, it colonizes the gastric mucosa by 4 mechanisms. Number 1 is motility, which is rendered to it by the unipolar flagellae, because of which it can traverse the thick mucoid lining of the gastric mucosa. Next is acid resistance. So basically this bacteria produces enzymes such as urease, arginase and different amidases, which basically counteract the hydrochloric acid present in the stomach and is responsible for colonization. Next are the substances known as adhesins, which can bind to the epithelium and help in the colonization. And the fourth thing is resistance to oxidative stress. So it basically has certain enzymes which produce certain metabolites which cause resistance in the microbe towards oxidative stress and prevents its killing. So basically colonization is because of 4 reasons. Number 1, motility. Number 2, acid resistance. Number 3, adhesins. And number 4, resistance to oxidative stress. Now, talking about its pathogenicity, that how does it infect the cells, basically it has different genes. It has something known as VAC-A gene, as the name suggests, VAC. So it basically causes vacuolization of the epithelial cells. And then there is the next gene known as CAG-A gene. It causes 4 manifestations. It causes cytoskeletal rearrangement, host cell morphological changes, expression of proto-oncogenes and release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Along with this, there is the mechanism of molecular mimicry, which is basically the lipopolysaccharide of the bacteria basically resembles the Lewis blood group antigen of the parietal cell, because of which within the host body there is down regulation of T cell and there is cross reactivity, which causes pathogenicity of the bacteria. Also, along with that, this lipopolysaccharide which is present in the bacteria, it inhibits the glycosylation and sulfation of the gastric mucus. So it is basically altering the quality of mucus, right? So the protective layering of the stomach is basically getting eroded. Apart from this, there are 3 risk factor. There are some host risk factors, the genetic risk factors such as certain inflammatory cytokines, etc. Then smoking is also a risk factor, as well as diet high in salt and preservatives. Okay, so we discuss about pathogenicity, VAC-A gene, CAG-A gene, molecular mimicry, inhibition of glycosylation and sulfation of gastric mucus by lipopolysaccharide, and certain risk factors, right? So before beginning, we must know that Helicobacter pylori basically is a triple positive bacteria which has catalase positivity, oxidase positivity as well as urease positivity. Okay, and this urease basically helps producing ammonia within the stomach, and this ammonia basically counteracts the HCl, which we talked about here, right? Acid resistance, and this helps the H. pylori to survive within the acidic mucosa. Okay, so mainly the bacteria, it colonizes the antrum of stomach. Okay, stomach is divided into different areas, like there is pylorus, there is antrum, there is body, there is fundus. So Helicobacter pylori mainly colonizes the antrum of the stomach, and what does it cause? It can cause gastritis, which is inflammation of the stomach. It can also cause peptic ulcer, and especially these peptic ulcers are they manifest as duodenal peptic ulcers. Okay, it can even be gastric, but mainly we see duodenal peptic ulcers. How will the patient present? The patient will present epigastric pain with burning. Now, how can we vaguely differentiate between duodenal and gastric ulcer is that if the patient is complaining of epigastric pain with burning after meal, that means it is mostly the duodenal ulcer. Why? Because if the individual is eating the meal, then it transits to the duodenum when it opens, and then only this acid can pass down the duodenum, right? But if it's a gastric ulcer, what will happen is even in empty stomach there could be excessive acid production, right? So there could be epigastric pain with burning in empty stomach. Okay, so within duodenum, this bacteria basically causes some changes. Okay, so Helicobacter pylori basically causes inflammation, right? And because of this inflammation, the D cells which are producing somatostatin is inhibited. That means there is no longer somatostatin production, and this somatostatin production is essential for the release of gastrin. Okay, so is essential for the inhibition of gastrin release. I'm sorry. So if somatostatin is only inhibited, what will happen? The gastrin production will increase, and because the gastrin production is increased, Because of that, there is increase in meal stimulated acid secretion. The basic function of gastrin is it acts on the parietal cells and it increases the production of HCl after meal. So if somatostatin is inhibited, gastrin increases, and this leads to increase in acid secretion. Now because of increased acid secretion, we know the pH of hydrochloric acid within our stomach is around 1.7 to 2, right? It's very acidic, and only our stomach has that thick mucosal lining, not much of duodenum. It also has mucosal lining, we do not deny that. So if this acid is high, produced a lot, and if this passes down to the duodenum, it will cause ulceration, right? And if it's in the gastric mucosa only, it can cause ulceration even in the gastric mucosa, and as well as because of continuous irritation of the duodenal mucosa by the gastric juice, there could be gastric metaplasia of duodenal mucosa. That means the duodenal mucosa, which is, normally it has goblet cells, it is columnar cells are there and all of that, it will now show the rugged gastric cells, okay, because of the continuous irritation by hydrochloric acid, right? Now this continuous irritation, this basically metaplasia, can consequently lead to something known as gastric adenocarcinoma. Gastric adenocarcinoma is more frequently seen in a pan-gastritis case rather than a duodenal gastritis. It also predisposes the person to something known as MALT lymphoma. MALT is mucosa associated lymphoid tissue lymphoma, okay. It also increases the risk for chronic atrophic gastritis, autoimmune gastritis, which can eventually lead to pernicious anemia, which is the deficiency of vitamin B12 because of destruction in parietal cells. It can cause adenocarcinoma of the stomach. Now this is what we thought, what we have learnt is this, the basically Helicobacter, it will increase the risk for these things. But Helicobacter, paradoxically, it is protective for the following conditions. It is protective against gastroesophageal reflux diseases, Barrett's esophagus, adenocarcinoma of esophagus, as well as allergic disorders, which is actually a weird thing. Now moving on, we see about the lab diagnosis. Okay, so the lab diagnosis is basically divided into two parts, invasive and non-invasive. Under invasive, we have again two things. Either it could be an endoscopic biopsy, and the next thing is the biopsy can undergo a urease test. So we basically take the biopsy from antrum, and this biopsy is then subjected to number one, histopathological examination, in which we stain it with Warthin starry silver stain, and this is how the gastric mucosa will appear. This black things, these are basically my Helicobacter pylori, and this is the gastric mucosa. This is what Warthin starry silver stain. The next is microbiological study. In that we can do gram staining, in which we will see gram negative bacteria. It was what? It was gram negative, motile with unipolar flagellum about 4 to 8 in number, and it was also curved, right? So it gives it a seagull appearance. This is important. It gives the Helicobacter pylori bacteria a seagull appearance. Apart from gram staining, we can also do culture. So there is specific media culture plates. There is the Sciro culture plate and the chocolate agar, in which we can do the culture. We incubate it at 37 degrees Celsius in presence of 5% oxygen. This culture is the most specific test, but it is not very sensitive. Apart from this, we can also do MALDI-TOF, which is basically automated biochemical study. And next, we can also subject the biopsy to urease test, in which basically there is a broth which has urea as well as pH indicated. In that we add this biopsy, and if it shows reaction, we say it is positive for Helicobacter. If it does not, it is negative, right? So this is a rapid test and it is quite sensitive. This is what we have talked about invasive tests. Next, moving on to non-invasive tests. Non-invasive tests include urease breath test, corpoantigen test, and immunoglobulin G. Urease breath test, in this what we do is we assess the radioactively labeled carbon-13, and this is used to detect the live bacteria, and it is very consistent and accurate. It is sensitive, quick, and sample. Mind it is most sensitive, okay, and it is used to monitor treatment or response also. In this, basically what happens is there is this mouth tube sort of thing, in which the patient basically puffs out the air, and if there is the detection of carbon-13, then we say it is urease positive. And next one is corpoantigen, which can detect live as well as dead bacteria, unlike urease breath test, which detects only live bacteria. The other thing, we can do ELISA for immunoglobulin G. Now coming on to treatment, we can give either triple therapy or quadruple therapy. In triple therapy, we basically give two antimicrobials plus a proton pump inhibitor. So for example, amoxicillin plus clarithromycin plus any proton pump inhibitor such as omeprazole. Why do we give two antimicrobials? Is to prevent resistance. Okay, if there is quadruple therapy, it is basically triple therapy plus bismuth, bismuth subsalicylate, and this we basically give for 14 days. And yeah, that's about it. Summing it up, we saw the morphology of Helicobacter pylori. How does it colonize the antrum of stomach? What it can cause? What is the basic mechanism in duodenum, which we saw? What are the lab diagnosis? And yeah, that's it. And then we at the end we saw about treatment. Thank you.